Recording in progress.
It's in progress. Hello, Shaun. Thank
Hello.
you. Hello. Thank you for agreeing to come on the podcast to be interviewed by me. So, for our many listeners and the many more to come, can you please share your full name and what it is that you do today?
You never mentioned anything about my full name, David Oliver Shaun Frohlich. That confuses people, I'm sure.
Oh,
Yeah. I was
right.
adopted, and my adoptive mother wanted to call me Shaun, but didn't think that the initials she'd have given me with Shaun Oliver David would help me in life. So she thought she'd help me a lot more by calling me David Oliver Shaun Frolic, but really Shaun. And it's not that helpful in the world of cybercrime and all the rest of it, and proving your identity. It's an absolute curse to have a given name that doesn't match your passport name.
Yes. Yeah. And I guess on top of that, people also just spell your name wrong all the time as well.
The
The
frolic bit, yeah,
yeah,
absolutely. But
yeah,
Tony, it means happy in German. I think you do know that.
yeah.
And I've always been perfectly chuffed that that's my surname.
And I was thinking about your first name actually, because mine, I'm always Tony with a Y. Doesn't matter how many times I tell people. Do you
Oh, I
get
see.
SEAN, SHUN, SHAUN?
Hmm. Well, there you go. Yes, apparently that's the correct way to spell Sean if you're in Ireland, but who knows? Anyway.
Oh, okay. And just a quick to touch on, you mentioned you were adopted. How old were you when you were adopted?
Oh, like, a matter of a few months old. And it's one of those things. Both my sister and I were adopted, not from the same lineage, and
Mm,
mum and dad, were always very upfront about that. It was never a sort of a hidden thing.
mm,
And I don't know how much it informs your life. I've always kind of felt I'm also dyslexic, Tony, as I think you know.
mm.
I've always felt kind of lucky that I'm a non-standard component, and I quite like being a non-standard component. I did have all sorts of fantasies when I was a little boy that some rich sugar mummy or sugar daddy would suddenly rescue me from all this. But actually, I was adopted into a fantastic family. They possibly had a little bit of a more of a sort of a difficult thing because I was so different to them. I mean, I looked physically, I really looked like my mum and my dad, black curly hair.
Mm.
But basically, all the time I was awake, I'd be winding them up. And what gave me energy and what gave them energy and my sister energy was very different. They were very scholastic,
Yeah.
as this podcast will bear out. My dad was a university professor. My mum was a
Ah,
GP and didn't come from a fancy background, and she wanted to be a nurse, and her brother was an amazing older brother. Said no way, because nursing was very downtrodden,
mm.
and he said you're going to be a doctor, and between the two of them, they made that possible. And so
Wow.
they were very, very academically kind of orientated. And my sister, she's done enough degrees for me, you, and half a dozen other people, and she's always been like super bright, super
Yeah.
academic. I would get great delight if she didn't get a double A star in an exam.
Wow.
And it says lots about me that the day that she didn't get into her first choice Cambridge University, I was just jubilant and she was in tears. I mean, what a nasty younger brother I was. I was just thinking, yeah, she's not got her way for once. But she went to Cambridge. It was just
Yeah.
that she was going for a co-educational college, and she'd
Mm,
never had any experience of boys. So yes, I had three very, very strong, very academic kind of shadows, and I
mm.
didn't give a hoot.
And I just a little part there about you and your sister kind of gives me a bit of comfort. Well, I don't know, but that's kind of how it rolls in my house as well. So our son and daughter, yes, delight in each other's misfortune. I think it would be
Yeah.
fair to say, but they love each other really. Um,
I mean, look, I'm 60. There is good and bad things about growing old, but you look back and you see things in a new light
mm,
if you allow yourself to. And I'm a massive fan of my sisters, and
yeah.
I don't know, like the other way around. but kids are kind of cruel when they're young and just being themselves. And I've learned a bit of psychology along the way. It kind of helps to be married to a psychologist, and you learn about things like attachment theory, and there's a lot of research that dictates, and it's hardly surprising. Being adopted, I always figured it's all nature and it's not nurture, because I wasn't like the rest of them. But that's making the mistake that the world is the way you imagine it to be, because you've seen it through your eyes, no matter what else you've learned or heard. And it took me much longer before I realized it's a fusion of DNA and the influences around you, so I feel very lucky that I was surrounded by all these bright boffins, and I feel just as lucky that I didn't give a hoot. I mean, I wanted to please, but we'll talk about it. I'm sure it'll come out of this discussion, or if we can make it a discussion rather than a monologue. But I didn't actually know what was expected of me. People say work harder, but I didn't know what that looked like.
And that was going to be kind of my next question for you. So you've got, like, paint is a fantastic background there. You've got ultra bright academic household, and we won't do primary school years. Let's go to secondary school. And you said you're dyslexic, so what was that like for you? What's your memories of secondary
You're talking
school?
to a bloke that can hardly tell the difference between primary and secondary. I kind of get the gist of it, but I can't remember the ages. I think my mother was very much, the driver in the house. My father was it turns out, a maths prodigy. He wasn't. He was very famous in his field of pure mathematics. Not that that's a field that people know much about. It's not a household name, but in that world, he was incredibly well thought of. He was an escapee German Jew. Get your head around it. Age 16, he fled his own country. He left his mum and dad's house and went on his own steam, jumping on and off of trains without the money to pay for the train rides, to get to Salzburg, to get to Israel, or then Palestine. And then when war broke out there, he fled that because he kind of didn't want to see any more of that. And he basically hid in the UK, where his brother was already a doctor of physics. And the pair of them were just enormously bright, and to hide from the authorities, Dad did a maths degree at Bristol, and it was meant to be a 2-year course, and he missed the first term, and so he did the second term, and then he did the third term. But he figured he was ready to do his finals, 2 out of the and marked his own paper 100%, finished his paper early, and the guy was a maths genius, but not quite so practical, my lovely old man. And so back to school and my life, Mum was the driving force at home. She was very demonstrative, very strong woman, and there were certain schools. I grew up in Wimbledon, in a nice family environment, and there were certain schools that she had it in her mind that I was going to go to. And funnily enough, in the bit between primary and secondary, they took me out of private education and put me somewhere for a little while in a comprehensive school, because Mum was always trying to find. There's some strange noise.
What's that? A landline?
It might be. I'm hoping it'll stop, like all the things that we don't like. I'm going to carry on, Tony, if it's not distracting the podcast. So wherever was I? So some school, and so my mother, although I always felt we were a little bit on different pages, and we had a pretty difficult relationship, she was always looking out for what she thought was right for me. And in hindsight, she had it mapped out. She and Dad were going to knock their pan out and put all of their life savings into making sure my sister and I had the best educational possibilities. And, that's what money went on. We didn't have a colour TV. I'm old. We didn't have a colour TV when people had colour TVs. We didn't even have a TV with ITV. We only had BBC. I mean, they were frugal, and they were frugal because they wanted to enable Sorrel and myself to have the education that neither of them could have had, and that's incredibly laudable, and clearly makes me feel a little bit guilty because it was just not up my strata. But
No.
Mum never gave up trying to find my thing,
Mm.
which plays out in a variety of ways. So she took me out of some nice little, Wimbledon prep school that she'd had me at into some comprehensive school, which would have gone against her grain.
Mm.
But she figured I'd be under less competitive pressure
Right.
and I'd kind of find my feet, and I did. But I don't know what possessed it, and it just put me back into the other one. So I went to King's Wimbledon, in year one as my
Mm.
secondary school, and I
Right.
remember my first experience was being welcomed in there, and very scary, hairy teacher using the word bloody,
Right.
and I was like, actually kind of frightened. It's like, what is this place? Very,
Yeah.
very disciplinarian and very scary and very austere. And that was really marked. But most of those years, I was just always in trouble, Tony. I was the fat kid. I was, in the lower grades, and
Mm.
boy, at King's, that gave you a lot of scope because they had 5 grades. I was never actually in the fifth. I
Ah,
normally kind of hovered between the bottom of the third and the bottom of the fourth.
yeah.
I just had an aversion to being anywhere near the top of anything. I kind of excelled at rugby. I was musical.
Mm.
And when I say I excelled at rugby, I was in the second team for that, but I was absolutely nailed on, and there were many other teams,
Yeah.
and I loved that, and it was a kind of a square bashing school,
Mm.
and I was just a troublesome teenager,
Mm.
found the pub, fags, booze, um, but um, but my education came in a variety of themes. I'm sure this is true for everybody, but I was as long as I was awake, I was trying to sell something. Whether
Yeah.
it was, to raise money for the, something going on at school, or whether it was just I was deprived. Although I was a fat kid, I was deprived sweets.
Yeah.
So I was always flogging things so I could buy,
Yeah.
I mean, you were like the king if you could get a full-size bottle of Tizer. That was like the top ranking, bit of booty. And I think you
Yeah.
had a 5D return. I really am sounding properly old. Some of the people, if they haven't given up by now listening into this, will be like, 5D, what's he talking about? Yeah, it's not some sort of broadband. But
Pence is D pence. Is that what it
yeah,
is?
pound, shillings,
Yeah.
and pence,
Yeah.
LSD. Yeah, not a drug. Our currency a long time ago.
Mm.
Oh, where's my thread gone? So yeah,
So
and,
you're
and I,
selling
so my,
stuff.
yes, I was selling stuff, and then I got I've always thrown myself into things. So
Mm.
I found sailing. Well, that's entirely wrong, and not a story that we've got time for in the half-hour time budget of everything. But Mum was always watching and trying to find my thing, and gadzooks, it wasn't ballet, and it wasn't crochet, and it wasn't all the other things that my sister lapped up. But
Mm.
then by accident, I was put in a boat where I was on a day where I was being very, very disruptive,
Mm.
and I loved it. It was a sailing boat, and Mum just sussed it.
Right. So you had
That's the
sales and
thing.
sailing.
So,
Ta-da.
age 12, I think I got taken to some smelly gravel pit near Staines. Enterprise School of Sailing probably doesn't exist anymore. 4 Sundays on the trot, Dad drove me there, and he walked around the banks doing his maths because he was just forever writing theorems.
Yeah.
And I learned to sail, and that was me. And so my education came much more. I mean, and the world's changed, but we lived in Wimbledon. I don't know how far Thames Ditton is away, maybe 12, 15 miles, something like that, down
Mm.
the A3. I would cycle to and from the sailing club, age 12 onwards, 3 or 4
Mm.
times a week. I was super fit,
Yeah.
and I hung out with older kids. I was always quite big for my years at that point. I'm a short ass now, but I got to the size that I am early, and
Mm.
I hung around with the older kids, and they had motorbikes and cars, and they were almost adults. And so
Mm.
I kind of got a bit of a university of life thing going quite an early age, between that and the paper round and and the guy that ran the paper shop took a shine to me. I kind of got promoted up through the ranks, and I became his kind of second in command. And he was always giving me out his philosophy of life. So I
Right.
had this
Okay.
really weird combination of a square bashing school where I was supposed to learn stuff, and actually, the street,
Yeah.
the sailing club.
Yeah.
you know.
Did you so when it came to exams, what happened there? Do you remember what you got?
Oh,
Did
yeah, I kind of do. I mean, it's not a memory I really hang on to. I had this conversation, not about me, but I just sometimes when I'm interviewing people, I'll ask a little bit about their school memories. Were you the kid that, when the exam results were put up in the olden days, that's bits of
yeah,
paper
on
in
the
the
board.
corridor and all that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Where did you look for your name? Top down, bottom up? I mean, for me, it was always bottom up, and I was always pretty disappointed that I didn't have to look too far before I found my name. I
Yeah.
really didn't do very well. I did. I mean, it was quite an academically strong school, King's, and I think it probably is now. But so I guess if you're in a fourth string of Kings, you shouldn't be right down the back of the pack. You just feel like you are because because you are, and I got quite a lot of O levels, but some of those O levels were A levels that I didn't pass, as well as the O levels that I actually took, if you get my drift. But I did a big transition. I was getting more and more of a misfit at home, and I was just trying to find my independence. And I just wanted to leave home at 16, and Mum really was doing her best to prevent that. And she didn't. It was very hard for her because I was pretty willful and pretty strong. But I did watch a TV documentary someday on a school where kids were hanging around, it not in school uniform. It was co-educational. It was in the era of punk, and they had the sugar spiked hair
Yeah.
and the leopard skin trousers that were sort of bondage strapped at the knee.
Yeah.
I mean, Jesus. Anyway, I was watching that, and it was quite a well-known school. And I remember saying to Mum, I will continue at school if I go to a place like that.
Right.
So I get emotional thinking about it because of course, at the time,
Yeah.
the fact that she dragged me around 16 different schools, which
Blimey.
I just as a 16-year-old, 15-year-old, 15-year-old going on 16, just
Yeah.
thought was an enormous pain in the proverbial.
Yeah.
That is motherhood, right?
Yeah.
She was just I didn't see it as such at the time. That's it's an emotional thought to me.
Yeah.
As a parent now, what is the right thing to push what you think is right or not? But anyway, she dragged me around these various schools, and the only one that I'd seen the documentary on was the only one I wanted to go to, and they didn't. They were the only one that didn't give me a place. So I thought, that's it. I'm off to join the Navy or something like that.
Yeah.
And the next thing I know, I'm back down there for a second interview, having been told, that I wasn't wanted by them.
Right.
And I was very confused. And it was a bit of a hijacking. I got there. Mum had this real ramshackle old car, and Dad had come down that time as well. And they opened the boot of the car and brought my viola out. I'm like, what's that doing? They want to hear you play it. It's like, what?
Oh wow.
I mean, I only played the viola because I got fired by my violin teacher because I used to, I know this will astonish you, but I didn't do any practice at all, Tony. I just used to turn up and chat at my lessons. And the violin teacher quite high standards and didn't see the point in teaching somebody that wouldn't practice, whereas the viola teacher quite liked having a chat with me once a week.
Right.
For a bit of
Wow.
extra money. So I'm just that's very rude to that lovely man. But anyway, so I did play the viola, and I don't know, they pulled some academic strings. They'd said something like, you got to realize this is an escapee German Jew, fellow of the Royal Society, head of the maths the science faculty at King's London. it's his son, you need to give him a second viewing.
Right.
And by the way, he plays the viola. Oh, well, by the way, we need a viola player in the
Uh,
anyway. So I spent 2 years at Bedales, which really was my university of life more than anything else.
yeah.
And everything that I previously thought was cool and right on, that was all out of whack there. And it's a whole
Right.
amazing place. And so, I you talk about privilege, you don't realize. And look, when I was born, I don't know what my destiny could have been.
Mm,
I got adopted by a family that weren't well off, but they sacrificed everything to put me into good places. And as
mm.
far as they were concerned, that was all. So I could go to university, which is the one thing I always knew I didn't want to do.
So what happened there then when it came to you've finished your 2 years at Bedales and then you say what?
Well, firstly, on the 2 years at Bedales, the current, I don't know what the current headmaster might think of this, but Bedales keeps in touch with its alumni, and they've had me back, and I've spoken there.
Mm,
And I have spoken, and I always speak to the people in the audience who look from the bottom up at the
mm,
results and don't feel like they fit, because
mm.
that's who I want to speak to. And when I was at Bedales, you didn't have to go to lessons. Now, some people have subsequently told me that's not right. I can assure anybody, and we keep in touch. There's a lovely WhatsApp group with
Yeah,
my school year leave, and some people have gone on to amazing things,
yeah.
but a whole variety of things, from taxi driving to founding household name companies that or a lot of them have been lovies and done very well
Mm,
on the screen. And at Bedales, although there was some pretty landed gentry there,
yeah,
there were people who came from far less well-heeled backgrounds than mine, and
yeah,
mine, so it's a strange thing,
yeah,
privilege. You don't
yeah,
choose it, you end up with it
yeah.
if you're lucky. But
Mm,
bias works in all directions. So I tumbled out of there. I had actually got a place at Southampton Institute to do yacht and boat design. I didn't want to do further education. I liked sailing. I was pretty serious about my sailing even then.
mm.
But the girl that I was going out with at the time was going to Southampton to do French. And so that's why I was going to Southampton. But,
Yeah.
according to her dad, because we spent too much time hanging out together, she didn't get the grades she needed and she went to Cardiff. And so I'm thinking, well, I'm not going to go to Southampton on my own to do yacht and boat design. I'm going to get a job. And if I hadn't left home, I'm sure I'd have been kicked out. I mean, Mum was pretty sad
Yeah.
and desperate. And 10 years after that,
Mm,
when Bytes was already a reasonably successful company.
mm.
That's the company that I started with this other chap sometime in between. I remember her saying to me, I had like 100 staff at the time. I remember her saying to me, Shaun, if you want to make a go of your life, I'm still prepared to sponsor you through university. Thinking, oh.
Oh, classic. Feel like he didn't go. So embarrassing. Embarrassment to your parents. You didn't go.
I didn't go to
Oh,
university. No.
um, okay. You left. You got a job. Then we're suddenly you're running a company with 100 people. How did you get from not going to university to getting your first job to then founding a
Yeah.
company and employing lots of
Um,
people?
well, it's funny because just to pause for a second, I couldn't fathom how my dad had left Nazi Germany and found his way
Yeah.
to Palestine. I couldn't work out how he'd been, there's more to it. He had all sorts of hilarious things, but getting electrocuted on a roof as a really, really rubbish electrician, connecting, the wrong thing up to the wrong thing, going on hunger strike and ending up in the UK and then being a genius mathematician. I mean, like, I don't get how all of that happened. I
Yeah.
remember being very confused when I was younger about how that all happened. And
Mm.
I suffer a little bit of that confusion in my own life now because, Tony, I mean, it's, I'm a really simple kind of person in terms of, things are simple. And it's just weird how one thing can lead to another, can lead to another. And you know, so the first thing is I always thought I was kind of lazy, but I wasn't. It was a sort of self-image thing, because I mean, crikey, I was getting up at 5:45 every morning and doing a paper round and cycling, you know, a long way through, you know, so I wasn't lazy. I just had this image of being lazy. So what happened was I ended up doing something. So I listened to Capital Radio a lot, and they used to have the Capital Jobs line, and they would highlight some jobs from around the capital. And I don't know if Kingston is around the capital, but you know, the Kingston Job Centre this afternoon, you can be a youth opportunity worker as a camera operator. So I got on my bike and cycled over to Kingston Job Centre, and they would say, no, you've got O levels. You know, you're overqualified for this job.
Right.
You know, the only qualification you need for this job is be able to read a ruler. And I said, well, I can. And she said, no, you really don't understand. This is not the right job for you. And I remember being really pushy with the woman, and I said, well, how does it work? How does it normally work? So, well, if I have somebody that's right, I ring up the bloke who's hiring you. And the YOP scheme was a form of government-backed apprentice scheme. You got paid £16 a week, and the government paid you, and the employer just provided the work, didn't make a contribution at all. And the idea was no obligation, but you know, at the end of 3 months, when that apprenticeship had kind of done its time, if they liked the look of you, they'd take you on. And so anyway, I was being pushy with a woman, and she said, well, I ring them up, and if they want to, they'll interview you. So why don't you give them a ring anyway and just check with him that I'm not overqualified? And so I basically, you know, just persuaded her, enthused her, into ringing this guy Les. And she rings him, and I cycle over to meet him, and he was going, wow, you are overqualified, but you know, if that doesn't give you a problem, it doesn't give me a problem. Oh, the other thing I should tell you, Shaun, is there's no way there'll be a job in 3 months' time. We're just not doing that well. You know, I'm just being a bit cheeky and just getting a bit of, you know, inexpensive help. Well, in next to no time, I was kind of, you know, reorganizing his systems and, you know, telling him better ways of running his own business and all sorts of shit. And he kind of didn't have a problem with that. And, you know, the three months kind of flew by, and a camera operator, this is something that doesn't exist anymore. The digital era put it out. But in the olden days, the way that printing worked, you took, whether it was a black and white, full tone black and white, or a full tone color, and you would break it into negatives, either one negative of black and white, or four if it was for color, the 3-point black, and with little dots in. And that's how the printing process required that all of the sort of industrial photography processes to go on in the background. And it was a skilled thing. And so I spent a lot of my sort of young life in a dark room and operating these cameras. And I ended up, after my 3 months there, getting a job in Hackney and living in a really naff kind of house share in Wood Green. And I spent a year there. And it was interesting, because I always ask people, again, when I'm interviewing people, I always ask about the interconnections between roles, because I kind of have this thinking that people are either going away from something or towards something. I mean, often there's a little bit of both, but when you ask people, that you'll get a clear steer, you know, to what extent they're going away from versus towards. And I just find that interesting. And I was working for this company, Trade Processes Limited, and I spent a year there. And it was trade unions, and, you know, the printing industry. It's quite, you know, on the Lea Bridge Canal, you know, we had a dead body roll up one day on the Lea Bridge Canal, and we couldn't leave our unit for the whole day. It was really, you know, it was quite real. Anyway, the boss goes away. The boss had sold the firm to a big printing company, but was still the boss. And he went away on holiday. And the father of the chapel, which was kind of like the main man, second in command, and also the union rep, he was away at the same time. And I suppose I was the next most sensible person there. And I never understood why we had yellow and blue dockets. And the boss said to me, I've got to explain to you why we've got yellow and blue dockets. They were the work dockets that followed the work through the process in the production. And he said, basically, the blue ones, you know, that they go to head office. The yellow ones, they go into a drawer in my office, and they're all cash sales. And I said, okay. And what happens with that? He said, well, because I'm away and George is away, all the yellow ones, that's your benefit next week. Like, what do you mean that's my? I didn't understand what he was saying to me. I remember thinking, holy schmoly. I could think how many yellow dockets we were doing. I was just thinking, well, we're never going to get promoted here. We're never going to get anywhere here because they're siphoning the profit out the back door. I mean, it's like, it's complete, it's disgusting. And the other thing that happened simultaneously to that was that they had just brought their first digital scanner in. And one of the processes that used to take a lot of skill, that a couple of kids, one with a white puck and one with a black puck, and their job was to, on a photograph, find the lightest bit and put the light puck on it, and the darkest bit. And they literally had 2 kids for the unit. I think one person, but I think the unions had some view, because I mean that used to be a whole day's work doing that, and then digitally, you could put it in the machine if it was within a certain size, and it would just create the negatives. So I'm thinking, between that machine and my crooked boss, I'm out of here.
Yeah.
So I thought the obvious thing to do was to go it alone and set up my own business. So I don't know why, but I thought I'd become a photographer, and I thought I'd take pictures of the kids at the local ice rink at Richmond. And I thought I would take a bit of evening work to pay my rent. I'd moved then back to Kingston, and I knocked on the restaurant opposite where I was living, and I said, I live nearby. I'm just curious, do you ever have any casual labour for people like me? And they sort of, well, maybe sometimes. How close do you live? I said, like that window there opposite, other side of the street. Okay, that is, we do get let down from time to time. We'll take your number. So I gave him the number, and about 4 hours later, I get a phone call. Yeah, we've been let down. Do you want to start tonight? So I went over there, and I presumed as a non-skilled person working in a restaurant, I'd be, waiting on tables, because I kind of figured that that's what I'd be doing. I remember being invited to get changed in the cellar in his blue and white check trousers and this funny white top with strange things instead of buttons, like weird.
Yeah.
And there's a massive bag of onions. I mean, like half the size I was. So dice that lot up. So I actually quite handy in the kitchen as a nipper. And so I was like smashing my way through these onions, and again, hard work. I was just doing it as well as I could, thinking obviously I'll need to get back into my clothes and be ready in time for service. And I was just going as fast as I could. And it turns out that was just some practical joke to the new kitchen porter. And this kid, he said to me, he said, "How thick are you?" I said, "Pardon me." He said, "How thick are you? Do you really think you're going to be serving? You're our kitchen porter. You're going to basically be our skivvy, our slave." And we just thought we'd, give it to you, but you've done pretty well with those onions. And I just kind of, I suppose I kind of charmed my way into their lives. And I spent a year trying to be a photographer while I wasn't doing shifts at this, which was kind of they didn't have Michelin star restaurants in those days, but it was that sort of thing. And I loved it, and I got really, really, really into it, and I spent a while there. And then when Lady Di got married, there was an extra bank holiday, and what happened on that bank holiday was that a lot of restaurants did special menus, and it was going to be a big celebration. The sailing club also had a 24-hour race going on, and they wanted me to captain. It was a team race, one of the sides, which I felt pretty fortunate they'd asked me, because I wasn't really good enough to do that. And I said to my mates in the restaurant, "Look, I can't do the shift on the Lady Di day because." And they were all very hard-assed, kitchen guys. And I was like, "Right, we don't want you anyway, mate. You're useless." I was like, "Cool." And the boss was begging me to go, and he said, I'll give you treble time, but don't tell any of the others." I said, I can't do it. I've given my word to the sailing club. He said, "I'll give you 4 time, but don't tell the others." It's not about money. I don't give a hoot about the money. It's about. And he said, "Well, you're letting this team down, and they are all very tough with you, but they are going to be screwed without you." So I ended up doing a half and half thing. And George, the head chef, when I turned up, for the main thrust of the evening, like Scottish, it's like, Ray, the boss, said that you needed me. He's like, he was really angry. At the end of the evening, George came over to me. His hands were trembling, and he said, "What's Ray paying you?" I said, "Well, I'm not supposed to say." He said, "You're not supposed to say, because he's going to give you a rip-off Ray, I can't remember, George put it more colourfully than that,
Yeah.
uncharacteristically filtering. And anyway, they were all on a fixed crack, and it was about 6 times or 7 times time, and Ray was having me over, and George was disappointed in me that I'd let my sailing mates down,
Right.
and I was disappointed in myself that I'd been basically lied to by that guy Ray Chance. So this is the path to founding a company. I left that place immediately. I just thought, you know what? I've lost my way here. I'm working every shift. I mean, every pocket, every jean pocket I had money in, because I was working that many hours. I couldn't run my own little business. I couldn't spend any money in the shops. I just kind of got sucked into it.
I thought you were going to say they were full of onions.
No, not that. So that was my formative years, and then I lead a strange life, Tony. I left without a clear idea of what I'd do next, but there was no way I was going to go back home, and I had to earn my rent and my food, immediately. And I was walking into Kingston again, and I went past an office, and it had some company cars outside, and I thought to myself, yeah, I fancy working for a firm like that and having a company car. That'd suit me. I walked into Kingston Job Centre, and that company was called Highline Reprographics, and they were one of the vacancies they had. So I walked back there, got the job that afternoon, and the white car that I've been looking at, which was a Vauxhall Chevette, that was my first company car.
Wow.
And they gave me a target of selling 3 of these reprographic cameras a year. I mean, these cameras were like big things. They filled a room. And by the end of month 2, I'd sold my 3rd camera. And, it wasn't the gift of the gab. It was that I'd operated them, whereas all the loons that were trying to flog it, you got a clue. So I just talked to people and sort of downsell them. You don't want the bigger one, you want the smaller one, actually, because of all of this, that, and the other. And so I to me, it was like, this is all right, this sales malarkey. I mean, I know what I'm doing. I'm just meeting people, being friendly, and helping them. That was kind of how I saw it. And I walked back into the office feeling so good, because the exact same day, without any means of paying for it, I'd actually put the deposit down and exchange contracts to buy a house. It wasn't a deposit. I'd exchanged contracts. I kind of figured how much I needed to sell to earn the deposit in the time frame needed. It was that way round. And I walked back into the office, and it was ashen faces everywhere. And there was a guy there that I was quite friendly with, a guy called Piers Cook. And he went, "You're right, kidder." I was like, "Yeah, no, I've just got my 3rd order." He went, "All right." I said, "Hang on a second." "All right." He said, "I need to take you outside." It was him that had given me the inspiration to get the property. And he had a side gig of selling life insurance based mortgages, because his dad worked for some mortgage company, and he'd help me out with a mortgage. And he said, "Do you know what it means for a company to go bust?" Like, "Not really." He said, "Well, you're about to find out."
Oh no.
We're all getting made redundant, and that's why everyone's got ashen faces. I said, but I've just sold that 3rd camera. Don't worry about it. But will I get my wages? Don't worry about it. What about that mortgage that I've just signed? He said, "Worry about that." And he decided he was going to carry on doing what he'd been doing for them, but for himself. And I just argued with him. You can't have a one person company. He was buying and selling consumables for the printing industry, and then the emerging IT industry, floppy disks, listing paper, ribbons. And he was the consumables division of this company, Highline. And as it was beginning to go into the digital era, and I just argued with him, like, you can't have a 1-person business, because if you're delivering to a client and the phone rings, then you're going to miss the phone call. I mean, it was that level of practicality. And in those days, telephone answering machines had first come out, and they weren't in businesses, they were in posh people's homes. And he said, "Well, I'm thinking about getting one of those telephone answering machines." I fell about laughing. He said, "Well, no one's going to leave you a message, for heaven's sake. It has to be at least 2. A business has to have at least 2 people in it, surely, Piers." And he said, well, I can't afford to employ you, mate. I said, but you don't have to. I could be your partner. And there's a bit more to it than that, but not a lot more to it than that. We were
Right.
partners, and we had a deal. You know, we would sell something, and 30% of the profit would go into the running costs of the business,
Mm.
and whoever sold it got 70% of the profit as their wages, commission only.
Yeah.
And he had 30 odd customers from Highline
Mm.
when we first started, and obviously I had none. And I literally just knocked on doors in industrial estates. And in those days, the knocking on doors question would be, have you got a computer?
Right.
No. Why would we need a computer? Oh, you have got a computer. Can I speak to the person that buys the bits for your computer? And, you know, some really nasty reception staff would be really nasty to people knocking on doors and all the rest of it. And I got a decent break where I was in the reception of a big firm in Epsom, having this conversation with a really, really unpleasant person on the front desk. And the very lovely bloke that was in charge of the computer consumable, well, all of the computers there, happened to walk past as she was basically tearing me to shreds. And he said, did I just hear you ask about computers? And I said, oh, yes. He said, well, that's my domain. Would you like a cup of coffee? And I got my first really decent customer. And as soon as I got my sort of 31st customer, Piers turned around and said, I reckon we should do this differently. I reckon whoever sells it, it doesn't matter. We should
Yeah.
all put 30% of the pot, 35 each way.
Mm-hmm.
Piers is a fantastic bloke, and don't read wrong into that story.
Yeah.
We were off. We had a business, and I just worked hard. And we went from selling paper and ribbons and chasing back the original suppliers rather than buying from middlemen, and printed computer stationery, and then printers, and then PCs, and then networks. And by the late 80s, that we were heading into the first ever property recession we ever had in the UK. And there was a lot of negative equity in the market and a lot of redundancies, and the market really depressed. And we were hanging on for dear life. And I kind of figured, you know, this business is too small to support both of us. But by then, Piers really was disconnected from what it was. And so I said to him on the 23rd of December that year, 1990, I said, look, you know, we got to go our separate ways. And he looked, and he had a really lovely house with tons of positive equity in it. And we had a few personal guarantees, and we were about 30 staff at the time. And he had a lot to lose. I had about £5,000 worth of positive equity in my house in Kingston, which, you know, I wouldn't have wanted to have lost it, but it wasn't a lot to lose.
Yeah.
And I just said, you've got so much more to lose than me. And you know, and you know, that was the beginning of the next phase. And it went on and went on and went on. And, you know, it's absolutely ridiculous. Those guys are now $1 billion turnover and a billion value.
Wow.
So yeah, I'm not a big believer in you need to go to university, Tony. I think you need to work hard, but I know that's a very old-fashioned attitude.
But there's lots of questions that I've got. How does that inform when you're hiring people? So you've how many businesses have you bought and sold or run?
It depends which way you look. So in my in my world, I built and sold bites, and I did some interim management, and then I bought a company, which is obviously I met you. You are one of 6 Microsoft partner account managers simultaneously for different disciplines back in those days. But you know, at Texas, we bought 2 or 3 other businesses on top, and then sold that. And then I did my time at Microsoft. And so, you know, in terms of, you know, on my own tariff, if you like, and it sounds blasé, I've had some other property interests along the way, about a dozen different companies of one sort or another. Nowadays, what I do for a living is I help people grow value in their businesses and more and more help them realize that value. Normally that's via an exit. It's not always that, it might be a partial exit. They might raise money of private equity or whatever it happens to be. And so since I started doing that, which was after my only ever real job at Microsoft, where of course we worked together as well, but so since 2012 I've been involved in 23, I counted up this morning actually, 23 transactionable exits, and almost a similar number of other restructures of one sort of, which is a ridiculous number in a short number of years. But I work hard, and I'm known to a little cluster of people, and so I get involved in that. So vicariously, it's quite a decent number, I guess.
Does anybody ever ask you what your academic background is, or whether you have an MBA? I just wonder that
I don't recall it, and I don't know if 60-year-olds get asked that question much anyway. When I was working at Microsoft, that was kind of hilarious, because I was working, you may remember, I was working on a contract basis. I'd gone to see Gordon Fraser after selling Texas. I went to see him to let him know. I always went to the kind of Microsoft GM and let them know what I was up to sort of next. And he had sat there with Scott Dodds and said, well, what are you doing next? I don't know. I bet you know what it's like to be in a channel managed by, that works with Microsoft. Yes, that's been my whole life.
Yeah.
I bet you could probably help us. Well, you guys need it. So I did actually do sort of 8 or 9 months, just every time the purchase order ran out, say, guys, the purchase order's run out, you need to cut me a new one. And it was all on trust. And then there was another recession. It was sort of 2008, I think, crash. And they had to stop using contractors. And there was a glaring gap in the UK leadership team. They had no partner sales lead. And at mid-year review, they'd been kind of castigated for it. So it wasn't even Scott. Somebody, I think it was Paul White, had mentioned to me, you could do everyone a right favour and do what you're doing as an employee. And I laughed. I was thinking, well, I'm not an employee. I'm a businessman, for heaven's sake.
Yeah.
Then I thought, what on earth? Does it matter what I am? I like doing what I'm doing. And I think I found a good place for me to be. And I feel welcome and able to help. So I sort of called up Scott and said, yeah, I'll tell you what, I'll throw my hat in the ring for that partner sales role. And of course, that means that, I had to rub shoulders with the people in talent acquisition and HR. So I might have been asked at that point, but I think it was a very strange conversation. It was a lady, you probably remember her, called Agneta. And Agneta Joska. And she basically said, well, I'm supposed to ask you all these questions and check you out, but it seems that all the powers that be really, really want you here, and they don't want me to cock this up. So I just need to guide you through the paperwork as if we've had the conversation. I remember, yeah, that's all right by me. And then she was talking about pay scales, and she said, we have, you'll be a level blah, 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 and the pay scales from here to here. I said, well, I'll have that one. Like, why wouldn't I want that? Well, because that will impede your opportunity to get a promotion or a pay rise. I'm like, why would I care?
Yeah.
So that was my first experience of being asked that question in later life, but it was kind of asked without needing to know the answer.
Yeah.
You know me, Tony, I talk a lot, and people don't with me for very long before they find out that I'm adopted dyslexic and basically, ran away from home, ran away from a lovely home, to make my own way when I was 18, and I'm kind of proud of that. And I'm not the other way. I'm not against people that have got great academic qualities. But just to say one thing is, I help a lot of very, very academically bright people make kind of practical decisions. And even within our family, on my sister's side, they've all kind of done brilliantly academically. My kids have done brilliantly, but they're not so academic. And nature, I don't know.
And that was going to be a question that I had for you, is how did your experiences, and I guess seeing what you do in business as well, how do you think that influenced your children's decisions or what you wanted for your children?
Oh, that's a big question, Tony. And I don't know. I mean, I've always said to my kids, and it was my father's influence on me, live your life. You know, he used to say, I've got no worries about Shaun. You know, he didn't pressurize me to go one way or the other. And I absolutely, definitely did at key times do my best with Gemma and Alexander, you know, at certain pinch points, you know, when there are exams and all the rest of it. Look, their mum and I divorced a long time ago. And, you know, that's a rotten starting point, because the parents need to be on the same page. And when they're not on the same page in life, it's pretty hard for them to be on the same page with that, which is not an excuse. I mean, it's an excuse to work at it harder. But we did have, in some respects, philosophically quite similar views. We wanted them to do as well as they could do whilst they were doing it, but we weren't het up about what it meant for the future. Actually, Caroline, their mum, had a fairly bohemian kind of childhood, but she went then the other way. She then wanted to put herself through college, and she did learn up. So she absolutely, I'm sure her preference would have been that they took to academia more. They neither of them liked academia, and they kind of got through school. Both, you know, well, Gemma stayed until the end of lower sixth, and Alex went all the way through. And he went to Southampton and got a degree in marketing. But what does he do now? He is like an action man. He lives out in the wilds of northwest Canada, works for a microbrewery. You know, I hate the fact that he's miles and miles and miles away, but he's living his life. And he's just doing, you know, he spent a little while living in a caravan, touring around. He's been resourceful. And he doesn't want to sit in an office, and he doesn't want to pay a ton of tax. He's got unbelievably high principles, and he's very green. And, you know, his version of life is the life that he's leading. And, you know, so he did get academic qualifications, and I'm sure that proved useful to him in his life, but doesn't bear into the life that he currently leads. And he's, you know, just coming up to his 30s. And Gemma, who's just a little bit older than him, she did go, she left, as I said, you know, a year before the end, in the end of her lower six. She went to the Academy of Contemporary Music in Guildford and thought she might be a pop star. Sorry, Gemma, if you ever get to hear or watch this. Then thought better of it and went to Leeds Met to learn about running events and event management, and did a year there of a 3-year course with the second year as a sandwich. She came out of that sandwich down to Hamble, which is where I'm basing myself today, and lived not very far from where I'm sitting, and just loved being part of business, being part of a firm, and just didn't want to go back to uni after that. And, you know, she's worked since, you know, and for her, you know, when she is working, she did end up at some point in the IT industry in quite a well-paid vendor management role, funnily enough. But when she is working, what gives her joy is working with people, solving people's problems, being resourceful, being needed, being helpful, being the expert at a process or whatever it happens to be. And you know, that's all about her personality. And she's not, you know, financially driven. I don't know that many people that are. I know a lot of people that say they are.
So I guess to kind of come to a close, and it's such an amazing story, Shaun. Just like, I know, like, we've met each other, we work together, and I don't know, just amazing, all the different components as they come together. What's next then?
Tony, I am absolutely loving what I'm doing. And, you know, if I get the privilege to do what I'm doing right now till I can't do anything ever again, I would be happy as Larry. You know, working with bright, business owners, helping them see the wood for the trees, taking the tough decisions. I've scraped my knuckles plenty along the way, and when you scrape your knuckles, you get the opportunity to learn, but you don't necessarily learn in that moment. We often say the lesson I learned was you don't really know. And so every day is a school day to me. I've seen lots of stuff. I love helping the businesses that I work with exceed their wildest dreams. And I still feel, it's so much a product of our yesteryears. I remember doing this thing in some speaking at WPC, and I was trying to make that point. Who thinks of themselves as a great artist? And very few people in the auditorium put their hands up. It's like, when did you last pick up a coloring pencil and try and draw anything? Well, it's a long time ago, and you sort of forget that your capability, confidence in other areas might now help you in a way, and you might actually be really talented with that or whatever. So I kind of always celebrate my oddness. I've always, as my sister says, Shawnee, you're always very sure. and that's, not everyone's cup of tea. I know I'm not everyone's cup of tea, but I've got a growing sense of confidence that some of the things that I've seen can be really helpful to people. And when I kind of get that lovely mix between somebody that really genuinely wants to take themselves and their business forward, and they're prepared to look at everything properly to do that. And when I meet somebody like that whose business bears some relation to something I can relate to, where I think I could be the right person to help them, then it's just awesome. And some of my clients, when I first talked to them, two in particular, they kind of presumed that I'd just not be interested because their businesses were tiny. And I said to both of them, well, I'm really glad that we're having this conversation. I don't have a metric for size. I'm only interested in whether it be a lot of fun and whether so to me, my kind of catchphrase is, I want to work with people who will feel really extremely lucky to have me in their wheelhouse, whose wheelhouse I will feel extremely lucky to be in. It's kind of as simple as that. And if I can keep doing that, at some point I'll get out of date. I'll not know the new stuff. I'll just talk too much and I'll be a blithering old git. But that ain't happening today.
No. And as an actual final point, so what do you think has served you, I don't know, consistently well? You think, because in my mind I'm thinking, so firstly, selling ties are at school, or it's knocking on the restaurant door to say, what work have you got for me? Then it's saying, I want that car outside that company. What is it that's kind of served you well in building your career?
I mean, I don't think I've been asked that question, and I hope when I reflect on it more later on, I'm happy. I'm still happy with this get But I think what has defined everything is, well, it's got to be possible, right? If other people can do it, why couldn't I? And actually, just because no one's ever done it, does that mean to say you can't do it? So I kind of like just thinking pretty much everything's possible. I really believe that. And if it's possible, then it could be possible, for me or with me. And so I think it's the sense of all the possibilities that I hope, when I wake up tomorrow. That's a brilliant question. I hope, for me, it's that, you'll never know. I mean, I'm sitting here in this really lovely place. I love what I do. I love my kids. My kids love me. I love my wife. My wife loves me. This is all, very extreme. I feel incredibly lucky. And I think pretty much everything that's good and great would have seemed pretty improbable to me when I was that lumpy fat kid back in primary school. And so, I suppose it's that, of all the possibilities.
Love it. That's great. Thanks, Shaun.
That's a pleasure, Tony. What a lovely thing for somebody to go and ask you about your life. I don't know. If anyone listens